Kirsten, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited just to be having a conversation with you, actually.
Me too. I've been waiting for that moment ever since we were in a panel discussion with Lorenz Sell. And
Mm-hmm.
then we thought, okay, we need to record something to give
Yeah.
access to the audience. And we'll speak about process.
Mm.
And before we get there, always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Oh, you have such good questions, which is not surprising because you're a facilitator, but that is a very nice question. I actually started calling myself a facilitator pretty early on in my career, but it wasn't necessarily intentional. So what happened was I was coming from working at a very big corporate, one of the big insurance companies in South Africa. And my role was like a project manager slash scrum master, one of those like
Mm.
kind of things. And I just was drained by it and the energy that I had to bring to work. And so I was looking for something very different. And I applied to a company that I loved their philosophy. They were super alternative and they didn't have any roles. In fact, if anything, they said explicitly they don't like process people, they don't like agile. So
Wow.
I just sent them what I love doing. And I was like, this is why I love you. I love the things that you do in these ways. And this is what I love to do. Is there any way we could find something that I could do? And the CTO there is still someone I respect hugely. He met with me and we had lots of conversations and got to the point where he was willing for me to bring some kind of agile working into the business on the condition that I created my own role. And
What a
so
nice
then I was like,
challenge.
well, what do I want to do? And I was like, well, I don't want to be a project manager because the like manager side of that is just didn't fit. And then Scrum Master has always been an interesting word that I don't really fit with. And then I was like, well, an agile coach, but I'm definitely not an experienced enough coach. I can't put that on my resume. And so then I came to this word facilitator and I felt so drawn to it because it was all the things I wanted to be doing, like creating spaces for people to enter conversations if they wanted. And if they didn't
Mm.
want it, then they didn't need to be there. And so I called myself an agile facilitator. And yeah, after that, I've always seen facilitators being core to my role. I've come closer and closer to it. That was a long time ago. Yeah.
Wow. So after a while, you ditched the agile and you stuck with the
Yeah.
facilitator?
Yeah. I think what I struggled with all those previous roles, like Scrum Master or Project Manager, is often you're torn between numerous agendas. Like you're
Mm.
expected to implement Scrum, but you're also expected to hold these spaces for people to find their own solutions. Same as like an agile coach, like a
Yeah.
built-in juxtaposition. Whereas a facilitator just has hundreds of tools in their toolkit and offers them when they're appropriate. And if they're not used, that's also fine. And so Agile is just one of those tools that I now have, but I'm not wedded to it.
Not restricted. Beautiful. And I often feel with project managers and scrum masters and agile coaches just because they are, it seems like the forgotten leaders in the company.
Mm,
So they do lead, but they don't have formal authority. So they
mm,
do facilitate, but they wouldn't call themselves facilitators. But a project manager without facilitation skills is overwhelmed.
yeah, yeah. I think I saw you write a blog on this in the last week or two around the importance of facilitation skills for leaders.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. And it's that I think where facilitation skills are actually embedded in so many roles for them to find like a skillful expression,
Yeah.
right? Like a leader with facilitation skills has so much more available
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah. And I think, and that's where the bridge is to the topic we want to address today is the process. That
Mm,
many of those who put the label facilitator on their resume as freelancers or solopreneurs,
mm,
they often facilitate maybe single workshops.
mm,
And it's then difficult to really bring the entire process perspective in. So
mm.
how did you, well, maybe start at the beginning. How did you convince this company to actually do focus on process and agile, although they didn't want that in the first place? What was the magic key?
Yeah. Well, the honest answer is I have no idea. Um, I just remember having tons of like really honest, authentic conversations with the CTO. He was someone who, when you just find a kindred spirit who is curious about the same things you are and open um and we were just curious together. We were just speaking, and I was genuinely curious about how the business was working and how things were going. And so I was asking, I think, a lot of questions, and he was as well. So it was mutual, that thing of like
Mm.
true conversations when you're able to move with the other person. So just as I was moving, he was moving too, and we were exploring. And um, I think I was able to understand what they were really struggling with, because they had like very little structure, very little process. And that was a good thing. It was actually what they loved and what they wanted. And I also loved that, and I was drawn to it. So I'd say it was like curiosity and moving with the other person. Then we just created something.
Which is beautiful because these are the strongest facilitation skills. The listening to their real needs, understanding what it is beyond the words, and then
Hmm.
implementing something that fits without squeezing them into structures they don't want.
Exactly, exactly. I think I was probably doing it though in like a very unawares or
Mm.
unintentional way. Like since then, I've found a language for it, but then it was, I don't know if you've ever worked with someone where it's also just easier to work with them. Like some people are more coachable or easier to relate to, and then some
Yeah.
people it's hard and you find yourself preparing a lot. And so I also have to give credit to him because the environment around him was very
Yeah.
easy to be in.
Yeah. True. And it's
Yeah, and
beautiful if you can find that, the ease and the collaboration, the
exactly.
work.
And it actually makes me think of what you said about like solo facilitators or people doing their own business, because I think it's hard and it's not always a choice you have, but it's really important to choose who we work with.
Mm.
I sometimes get requests, even though I'm internal, um, you get requests from all over, and some requests are harder to fulfill than others because of a whole bunch of reasons. And I found when I was running my own business, I wish I had actually been clearer around what I want to do and what I don't want to do, because so much extra work goes into
Mm.
those don't want to do's,
Yeah.
and you don't even necessarily bring the right kind of value. Maybe someone else would have been better suited, so it doesn't
Yes.
serve you or them.
Yes. And I think we very often get caught by using the wrong currency for charging. So we only look at money and the monetary side of
Mhm.
it, and we forget about our energy.
Yeah,
And I think if we look at our energy balance and how much energy some jobs cost us versus how much they bring us, and then suddenly I think if we're in a positive place and we nurture our energy, we then also create more opportunities to make more money.
absolutely, absolutely. And even if you do get paid a ton more, it's not going to replenish that energy deficit that spreads across the rest of your work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, difficult though.
So you're still in the corporate, or you're back in the corporate as a facilitator.
I am, but I think it's corporate with a difference. So
Mm.
it's a 2,000 person company. So I work for Automattic. Um, Most people know them for WordPress.com or WooCommerce or Tumblr. So they've got about, I think it's 21 brands. Oh, I can correct that afterwards for the recording. I should know. But so on paper, they're a corporate. But my career has really been this movement away from traditional structures and itching against, like, ironically, process and bureaucracy and structure, and looking for where can I find like authenticity and integrity, because I have to have congruence. And I was so drawn to Automatic because for years and years I've heard these great things about them, that they have managed to build a 2,000 person company with very light structure, with embedded values, um, and distributed. They were distributed from day one. So like over 13 years ago by now. Um, so I was really drawn to just see like, what would it be like to work at a company like this? Is it possible? Because if they can't do it, then I might just give up and stick on my own for the rest of time. Um, And it's a beautiful company. I could talk about it for ages, but that thing of choosing who you work with and who you want to dance with, yeah, I am choosing Automattic because of how it allows me to be, if
I
that
love
makes sense.
that. Who you want to dance with. Yes.
Yeah.
And before we get into the content of process, I think many in the audience might be just curious, what are you doing as a facilitator for such a company? Because I interviewed Lani Bear a couple of weeks ago, and she's a facilitator in a large law firm. And it
Ooh.
was fascinating to hear what a facilitator does in this context. And
Mm.
now hearing from you, hopefully, what you do in a large tech company.
Ooh, I'm curious. I'll go and read that one about the one in a law firm or watch it. So when I was hired with one other. We were hired as facilitator coaches, and we were hired to build their learning division. And being, as I mentioned about Automattic, quite atypical, they weren't following traditional L&D like processes necessarily, and we were given pretty much full autonomy to create a division as well as offerings that would serve the company and also kind of amplify this culture. You don't want to bring in a culture that's counter to what we have. So that is what I do in a nutshell, is that I do a lot of the work to support those kind of programs, which means a lot of facilitating and coaching, and then also with my peer, the stuff around supporting the division, which takes all sorts of forms.
Beautiful. And I think the culture bit, as a facilitator, you are there to shape and enhance and grow the culture of a company, is very often forgotten. And so many just focus on the work that happens in meetings, in workshops, but not what actually happens in between.
Yeah, I love that you said that because it touches on something that I get really excited about facilitation, which is that, like you said, a lot of people think it's contained to the meeting or to the conversation. But actually, I think it's one of the most powerful tools for culture change, because whatever you create here begins to infuse the surrounding culture, and the patterns for collaboration or respect that people learn in those spaces infuse everywhere. And conversely, if you've got toxicity here, it's impossible for it to remain contained. Um, so yes, like facilitation as a tool to amplify and support culture.
Yeah. And I wonder how it works. Is it something that you would do explicitly, or is it something that happens like a Trojan horse where once you experienced it, you have to embrace it and you cannot unsee it?
Mm, maybe it's both,
Mm.
in the sense, the one thing that's very important for me is opt-in, and I think it's become more so having worked in L&D for the first time, because a lot of L&D divisions aren't opt-in. It's mandatory training. Do this. You will
Mm.
learn about this. So I hold the same with facilitation, that it's an invitation into the space. And what you're inviting people into, they can't possibly know until they're into it. So you share a bit about what the invitation is, and then they enter. And then, as you said, once you've seen something, you can't unsee it.
And what I hear is respect and trust. So,
Mm,
respect in the decision or the autonomy of the colleagues, that they're old enough, they're adults, so
mhm,
can opt in. And then it's your or the company's or the L&D's job to make it attractive and to spark curiosity, but you cannot
mhm.
force them. And I think if as an adult you can then opt in and sign up, then you sense that someone is trusting you on your decision and doesn't force you. It doesn't have
Yeah,
this connotation of, oh, you're not good enough, you need to work to learn more.
yeah, exactly. There's so much that you could unpack there. That feeling that you mentioned, it has like a term in psychology called reactance, which is when you're told to do something and you feel that inclination to like, no, I don't want to, no. So I
Don't
think
tell me
that's
what to do. Yes.
exactly like, I don't know why. Actually, I want to do the thing you're saying, but now that you told me,
Yeah.
so I think that's part of it. But then the other part of it, I think, is way deeper than that, like motivational state. And it's something I've learned by following L&D literature really closely over the last 2.5 years. And it's the position that we came from as facilitators and coaches was this like deep respect and trust for people knowing what they need, especially as adults, right? Like you have made it this far in your career, you know yourself better. Whereas what's strange is in L&D, I haven't necessarily found that as much. A lot of the L&D forums, you'll hear things like, what do you wish your leaders knew? Or what should we all be teaching our leaders in the 21st century? And we're just like, we should ask them, and and we
Yeah.
should create what they want, and we should create spaces where they can discover that. But it's such a different mindset. So that's also back to what you were saying, that that choice and opt-in is, it's not just motivational reactance. It's
Mm.
also, I think, about something much bigger, about helping people to learn what they truly need to learn, which we don't know always.
Yes. Yes. And it reminds me of the concept of eating our own medicine. So teaching leaders design thinking, that they have to be user centric and ask the target group what they need. And at the same time, not considering your internal users, your internal target group, and ask the leaders what they need.
Exactly. Yeah, because how many times have you gone to a training and discovered all these amazing tools, and then you get back to your context and you're like, these tools are so cool, but like my context is here and you were teaching me over here. And what actually matters is all those little bridges that I needed to build in order to integrate.
Mm.
And my problem is actually over here. So I've spent 2.5 days, but it hasn't moved the needle on the things that are significant to me.
And I wonder, is it a problem of the content that is taught, or is it the bridge or the way we apply the content or invite the learners in? Because I can imagine that many of the content pieces, you can present them in different ways,
Mm.
but it's very difficult to immediately see how it applies to my own specific context.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's both content as well as process, right? So how it's delivered. So content wise, I don't know, if we just take the topic of leadership, right? So one of the offerings we have is to support new leads at Automattic. What does a new lead need to know? Like that list is probably infinite, right? There is so much stuff. What does a new
Mm.
lead need to know? So what is the content that's appropriate? Um, So it is about finding the right content, but acknowledging that content's infinite. So then we come to process, and it's like, well, what process is going to help people identify what content they need and
Mm.
then help us to bring it when it's relevant? So practically what that looks like is we have 3 types of containers. We've got coaching containers, workshop containers, and training containers. And coaching containers are 80% process and 20% content. And workshop containers are 50-50, and then training is 80 content, 20. And so we're
Mm.
always asking, like, is this a training problem or a coaching problem? And what I lean towards is actually most of our things are coaching or workshop spaces.
Can you help us to understand the distinction? So, what do you understand by process?
Mm.
So, when you say 20% content, 80% process, what is this process bit? And how do you know whether it's training or coaching?
Yeah, well, we don't always know. There's lots of unknowns. So content is the theory, right? So like if we take some typical content in a new lead space, it would be how to have effective one-on-ones, how to manage conflict, how to communicate upwards, how to manage a project. Like I said, the list is infinite. So that would be the content. And if we use the new lead example, because we take a coaching approach, we have about 20% content. And 80% of it is process, meaning it's more coaching and facilitation. So what we do is we have like a 4-part series, but we ask questions that help people connect with their experience and their needs, and then to clearly articulate them. And we go through like a group coaching facilitation process. And then I have all this content. We've built this content library over years and years of working with new leads, but I never show it to them. I have it there. And then based on what's coming up through the process, I offer it. And we sometimes call it like pebbles. We just drop pebbles in the pond, and some of them ripple, and that's great. And some of them just go like plop, and they don't resonate. And we're like, that's fine. We don't need
I
that
love
one. We can
that.
check it out. I'm not attached to the content.
I love that. And then it's problem based, or it's rather a pull. So you pull them in. Oh, we're talking about this. You might be interested in that. And so you already sparked their curiosity instead of making it feel like school, where you have to read through all of that. And if you're not interested, you read, but your mind is not there. So you won't absorb it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. And we're doing it in community. So there's usually like 5 to 7 other leads there, new leads, and they're sharing their experiences. And if I'm honest, I think most of the time they learn from what others share more than me, which is also different to a lot of L&D, where L&D, you're the expert and you have to bring the stuff and you're measured based on your ability to be the expert. And we hold that very lightly.
Yeah. And especially when we hire highly educated people, you call them new leads, but most probably they've been leaders before. And even if they just graduated from university, they might have had a leadership position in a club or something else. So they do bring experience and expertise. And I think that's what is beautiful about diversity in an organization, right? That everyone brings in their own experience in their previous lives. And if you cut that out and monopolize the content to just one expert, how much opportunities are you actually leaving on the table as an organization?
Oh, that's such a powerful expression of that, I think, is the range of options that become possible when you loosen your grip on content. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing that leads me to question, which maybe you have an opinion, there's probably a model out there. I haven't found it, but I'm always asking myself, like, if it was a spectrum of like finite fixed knowledge, like this is the right way to do it, versus, as you said, there's like diversity, there is no right way. Like, how do we know what is in this space? Like, for example, how to give an injection. That's probably finite. Like, I don't want diversity there. Like, please give me the textbook injection. But I think what I found is that actually like 90% of our adults' professional experience is in that space of complexity, diversity, no one way. But I am always curious, like, is this the thing that's finite? Is this a training space?
And it's funny that you said that because I had a very long and emotional discussion with a good friend of mine last weekend. And he is a consultant in the area of tax and audit.
Ooh.
And we're talking about micromanagement. And he said that in the space where he's working, it's good and important to be a micromanager for the first 3 years that they onboard new team members, because these new team members don't know what they do and they have to learn all these procedures and all these laws and how you do things. And me with my facilitator's heart, yes, but they bring in so much creativity and ideas. And it's like, yeah, but it's not required on that job in the beginning. So yes, you need to grow them so that they can learn and become more independent. But it's good to be a good micromanager. Just got goosebumps. Not from excitement.
From the stark contrast, where did you
Yeah,
land for yourself at the end of that
yeah.
conversation?
That basically at your question. So, what are the professions where it might be necessary to have strong training or a strong, he called it micromanagement, but I think the term is so loaded. And I think yeah, medical doctors. If you're in mental health, it might be, or in psychology, it might be good also to bring your experience and the human factor in. But if you're a surgeon or an anesthetist,
Yes,
yes,
anesthetist.
then you don't want to hear everyone's opinions, and
No,
there's a
exactly.
right and the wrong way.
Yeah.
So I think there are indeed a few professions, maybe in
Mm.
science as well, but there it depends.
Yeah. It's such a good question to ask ourselves, I think, because we have this natural bias towards collaboration, co-creation.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what you're touching on is super important because it is our bias. And um, something I'm learning also is that it's not just at the like discipline level, science, art, whatever. It's also even more granular. It's almost every scenario we need to check what our approach should be, right? Like,
Mm.
so I've got a little rainbow that I use, but it's like, how much time does the group have available? Because if they only have half an hour, then maybe a co-creative process is just setting them up for failure, and we just
Yeah.
need to send one person off to go and decide and report back. And there's a couple of questions I think that we can ask ourselves to calibrate our approach. Like you said, the risk. What is the risk of this going wrong?
Yeah.
If it's
Yeah.
high risk, we need to calibrate as well.
I like the rainbow.
Mm,
Yeah, about the
seems
time,
exciting.
and also I think it's maybe preferences,
Yep.
because I think there are some people who just enjoy collaboration more than others.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation last week with Deb. She wrote a book, Collaborate, What We Get
With
Wrong
an
About
H?
Collaboration. Yes.
Oh, that's funny.
And that we have different understandings of what it means to collaborate. And very
Mm,
rarely we actually discuss our understanding and preferences, but just assume that everyone has the same understanding.
yeah. Yeah. And the same like come from place, right? Because if you look at Automattic, we have people on almost like every continent. So the cultural expectations of what collaboration means or their prior work experiences are fundamentally different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then depending on the profession and the preference, collaboration might look totally different. I think programmers, they can be very creative in their approach and their different programming languages. But I think the way they collaborate is very different from a group of marketeers
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or
And
sales, customer service.
exactly. And that I think is part of the like real craft of facilitation is being able to like attune to the context, the people, the needs. Um, and it's imperfect always.
Which is also the beauty of it, because then we don't get attached.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the mindset that distinguishes your approach to L&D and the learning. That okay, we're nothing is perfect. It's always in the flow, and then you don't get attached to the specific content, and you remain more open to
Yeah. Yeah.
changes or the
Yeah.
input from the learners.
We intentionally, when we're setting up, because most of our offerings are like 4 parts over 2 weeks, so one and then 2 weeks and one. And then the first one, when we're contracting with the group, one of the things we explicitly say is there's an invitation here to co-create and co-learn. And what we mean by that is we are not entering the space as experts. We have some theory that has worked well in this context over years, but what we are more excited about is co-creating with everyone here. And so it's often the case that people add things and we change the slides as we go. And then once it's changed enough times, we actually change that program forever based on what every group brings to it. So it's quite cool watching programs that have run for 3 years. They have totally like shifted and it's like almost like the whole company is helping adapt them to Automattic's context.
I love that, and I wonder whether it's maybe in the DNA of a digital company or a software company that software is never done. right? It's not that you have the product and then you sit there and like, whew, okay, let's do the next project.
Tick.
It's never done. There's always updates. It's an ongoing thing. And if you approach everything in your company through this lens, then it becomes a continuous learning journey where everything has to follow this flow.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because like I mentioned, joined lots of L&D communities and was meeting with lots of people to try and understand. And I remember this one call with someone where she was implementing a mentoring program at her organization and wanted to see how we think about it. And so I was sharing some thoughts, and her mindset, you know, when you're talking to someone where like their mindset's off a little bit from how you see it, but you can't quite articulate it. And I was really struggling in the conversation to dance with her because I just was like, I couldn't get it. And then it clicked for me that she was trying to find a way to do it, have it done, rubber stamp it, ship it in the organization, and then move on to the next project. And so what I wrote down on a little sticky note during that conversation was, we'll never be done because we're learning with the organization. And that like helped me to ground myself in that conversation. And it's what I come back to is we're never going to be done. And that's not a bad thing. It's because we have to keep learning. Automattic will never stay static. And so we can't either.
Yeah. And that's where the process part in your training, I imagine, is so important, because the process part is what enables the learner to learn from each other. And it's more of a mindset training.
Yeah.
As I understand it from your explanation.
Yeah. And I know something that we've spoken briefly about before, but that thing around the process is the outcome. That's super important, is like when you're having those conversations or you're in these spaces, the outcome shouldn't be something you achieve after the fact by going and doing ABC. If it's a meaningful experience, the process itself is transformative, and you integrate and apply the skill already before leaving, you know.
Which reminds me of this, I don't know where I read it, but it made so much sense that we aim for a specific goal. So for instance, I'm deep into running at the moment. I want to run a marathon by the end of the year. And if I would just run the marathon tomorrow, it wouldn't be as satisfactory, because it's not about achieving that goal. It's about the process of the small wins every day.
Exactly. The process is what is bringing you joy and satisfaction.
Yeah. And still, I wonder, how do you keep then the learners motivated and engaged? How can you avoid it to be a Sisyphus task where you roll the stone up the hill and there you are, and then it goes down again and you start over? So I think, and maybe I could also ask a programmer, because they might be experts now to deal with that. But as a leader in these trainings, how do you help them to actually enjoy the process as much as you do? Because I think there might be something intrinsic in us that we get the dopamine high when we actually can check a box.
Yeah. It's interesting because something I do think about a lot is like intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So where are people naturally motivated, and when they're not, and we have to apply extrinsic motivation, like why? And I hear that partially in your question is like, what is motivating people to keep learning? And I actually find that learning things that I can apply now and see the value from is much more motivating than learning 200 things that then make me feel very inadequate about where I am now. And if anything, I apply one or two because the trainer told me to, and then they don't have the impact I thought they would, and I maybe lose trust with my team, and now it's demotivating. So for me, it's like that, the magic of compound interest. It is motivating because you see little changes in those compound.
Thank you so much. Yes. And what I hear is that it's empowering you, because it actually uncovers what you already know and gives you the opportunity to put this into action, instead of seeing this entire mountain of stuff that you don't know.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe you do discover something new, but it's like what you know is here, and this new thing, it overlaps enough that you
Mm,
can use it. Because sometimes when we're learning, it's like here and all the new stuff is over here, and there's just no bridge. But you want a little bit of like fresh water into the pond because that
yeah,
brings energy, but you don't want to like totally wash out all the water that's existing because then
yeah.
it's no longer the same pond.
Mm. So what is your drip strategy then? So how much, when you deliver a course and you have the new leads, they do have the new job to onboard on, and they have the content that they learn and the process. So, and what I understand from what you're saying, it won't be the 1 week you learn everything in a week course and then we leave you.
Mm.
So how much is enough and how much would be then too much of learning?
Mm. I don't think there's like a right answer to that. So, I don't know if this is there for everyone, but it's there for me, and it's a fear that I've had to work through, which is like that how much is enough, feeling like if we haven't brought enough, these people are not going to be okay in their space. Like, what does a new lead need to know to be able to perform? And that's where I kind of come back to more of a coaching mindset and ground myself in like these people are already whole, they're already
Mm,
complete, they don't actually need anything else. And what we're offering them is maybe a quicker process to like becoming higher performant, but or reaching their own goals. So I guess for me, it's like it'll never be enough and it'll always be enough, if that
mm.
makes sense. Like
Yeah.
it they don't need us. They can choose to enter these spaces, and I hope they'll be better for it, but they'll probably also be fine without
Mm.
us.
But then also means that the hiring strategy is actually so important.
Mm,
And that, because I think if you have a pool of people who share the mindset that you want to nurture, who share the values
yeah.
of the organization, then yes, they're whole and everything that you can teach them adds. And then you briefly mentioned it before that yes, in organizations there are also toxic behaviors that we can observe. How can you then, is there an option to change that, to convert them, or is letting go the only strategy?
I don't think so. I think there's that quote, I forget who says it, but like the organization is shaped by the worst behavior they're willing to tolerate.
Mm.
And it's important that we manage those exceptions. So, luckily, I'm not in HR, but we have a fabulous HR team that is strict on performance management. Um, and I think that's an important part of it is preserving the culture. And then the facilitation side of that is, yep, sometimes you're facilitating and you see the odd behavior pop up that is not what you had hoped. And then it's about like, how do you move with it or work with it? And yeah, I can think of one example. I ran one of these new lead programs. We run lots of different ones, but this one, and one lead showed up believing they were the expert and they were going to teach everyone through this program.
There's one
For the
of
first,
those in every.
and I was like, okay, and it's not really it wasn't aligned to the container, and their approach was a little different. So then I kind of call it like your facilitation muscles. Like, what do you do in those situations? Like, you actually do have to not police, but boundary some behaviors so that the group actually is preserved. So
How did you do
it does
that,
happen.
if I may ask?
I
I want
probably
to
didn't. I probably didn't do it super effectively. Um, I actually worked also with the other coach. I asked him what he would do, and I'm very grateful that I'm not alone in the organization. I think it's very hard being a solo facilitator. So I asked him, and the strategies that he recommended, which were useful, were um, first of all to explicitly ask for that person's permission at certain times. So they clearly saw themselves as an expert, and that's fine. But then say when you ask a questions group, everyone reflects on this question, so and so, I would love to hear your opinion after we've heard from a few others, because I know you probably have experience here. So
Such
so
a beautiful
positioning.
trick. Yes.
Yeah, framing. And then then there was some also, like, maybe you call it facilitation tricks, but maybe using breakout rooms a little bit more to kind of distill that energy, disperse it, some silent reflection spaces. And then I think also, not in this instance, but in other instances, one thing I've done is we have those agreements that you contract at the beginning with a group, and then asking the group if there's anything they want to change. And then if they don't, suggesting, I've noticed that some people get more airtime than others. Could we include this way of interrupting if we
Mm,
need? And then contract that with the group, so you've now got permission.
beautiful. So it's basically planning ahead,
Mm.
because the first strategy was similar. So you anticipate that they will say a lot, and then you still, and I think that's genius. You appreciate them, you give
Mm-hmm.
them a great feeling about themselves so that they will actually be proud not to speak first and sit there and wait and say, and I still have something to contribute.
Exactly. And it kind of comes back a bit to what you said earlier about non-attachment, right? Like, if you get too attached in that space, then you start feeling all these emotions towards that person, and then you can't even see them for the value they might be bringing.
Mm,
Whereas when you detach a little bit, you realize, like, I can't change that person. And it's not my role to change that person, but it is my role to create a conducive environment here. And I can only do that by believing the best of everyone in this space. So what magic can they bring? Like, trying to see it.
yeah, beautiful. According to you, what makes a workshop fail?
It's a very good follow on, I think, from what we're just saying.
Mm,
I think like a high level, it's probably like over attaching to anything. So over attaching to the process you've brought, over attaching to what outcomes the group may have wanted, because you designed a
mm.
session for them. Maybe they wanted to reach a decision, but now you're over attached to reaching a decision. And so, yeah, whenever we over attach, we lose our ability to move and flow and be with and see.
Even even literally.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just
because we're
had
getting
this
stuck.
picture like being attached to some books, and then we cannot move freely.
Literally,
Yeah,
yeah. Or even see, right? Because if you are physically holding on to something, your range of motion and sight
yeah.
becomes narrower. Um, and yeah, I have tons of examples of where I have done that and it's led to failure. And um, it's the remedy to that is also, there is no perfect level of attachment.
Mm.
Like, we're always going to be imperfect, but just be noticing when our attachment's getting in the way.
And I think you spoke to authenticity previously. I think this imperfection is actually what makes us perfect in the light of authenticity, because
Hmm.
nobody likes perfect. We always seek the impression perfection ourselves, but we hate it in others because they just remind us how imperfect we are.
Hmm.
And I realized that at some point that, oh, it's not about me and I don't have to be perfect. And then if I show up without makeup, it's even better because everyone else will feel more comfortable.
Hmm.
And these small steps, like embracing just being us, and
Yeah.
the impact it has actually on the group because it gives them permission.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I think of all my years where I did work at more traditional corporates, and there was like this performance of power, it's like it's a performance. And that incongruence, I felt like trying to find my place in it and never feeling powerful. And then as I've found my own way, like, authenticity is the most powerful thing for me. There is such power in authenticity, and it's not like a gross kind of power. It's the best expression of power.
Yeah, because it comes from groundness. It brings the image of a tree to my mind where you have these deep roots. And if you're grounded in these roots and then yeah, you just dance with the wind, but it doesn't pull you off.
Exactly.
And I think if then someone challenges you, it's easier to say, oh, yeah, sure. Let me listen to you. And maybe you are right. Maybe
Exactly.
there's
Yeah.
something for me to learn.
I hadn't thought of that. Oh my goodness. Like I'm gonna go back and revisit things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Which you need that detachment also to be able to
Mm,
do. Like it's that image you had of like roots but still movement, right? You're grounded in the value of authenticity and you're not attached to anything around that, so you can move with what's coming.
yeah. And in our very brief kind of warm up conversation before we hit the record button, we briefly touched on the topic of AI. And so artificial intelligence is now kind of coming into very quickly into everything we do. And I love the collaboration with ChatGPT and Notion AI and all these new forms of smart digital collaborators. And I wonder how you see it in your role and especially working for a software company. How do you use it and where do you see maybe the opportunities, but also the risks?
Oh, well, maybe it's helpful to share another lens that we look at our work through. So we look at our work through the personal, interpersonal, and environmental lenses, meaning that we do work to support individuals. We do work to support interpersonal growth, so like relationship building, deepening, and then at the environmental level, like at the culture, the artifacts, everything that lives at the organization. That's also where I think a lot of L&D teams fall short, is they only focus at the personal, train people, and then you fix the company, whereas there's a spectrum.
Can we park the rest and just double click on this one? I think
Yeah,
that's super
sure. Park
interesting.
AI. For sure. Whew, we can park it for a second. Yeah.
The L&D teams that focus on the interpersonal and the personal, so in the communication skills, the content, the coaching, but then
Mm-hmm.
they fall short on what do you mean by that on the artifacts and the
Mm.
culture?
Well, so if you take, and I'm not bashing L&D, this has just been the curiosity that I've observed is most L&D teams provide individual training. And what I mean by that is they may say it's communication skills. Anyone in the organization can sign up, and then you get individuals signing up. That I still consider to be personal
Mm-hmm.
because you're learning a skill, but you're not learning it in relationship, and we're not actually strengthening the bonds or skills between people. And so I am yet to see an L&D division that provides training for teams or experiences for teams to deepen their relationships and actually build those skills together. I think it's Peter Singer who says that teams are the fundamental learning unit of organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that it's great to learn as an individual, but often your work is expressed through the team unit, right? And so that's what I meant at Automattic is we create learning experiences for individuals and for teams to go through together. And then we're looking systemically, what can we do at the organization level to support these things through artifacts, culture, all sorts of processes and stuff.
I'm glad that I asked the question. And it makes so much sense. And because I imagine that it's like learning a language. And I think many of these skills are like learning a new language because we adopt all these words of holding space, creating containers, understanding what we mean by collaboration, by listening, all these things. And if you only learn them as an individual, how can you then actually communicate with the rest of the team? And I think, especially You also mentioned that we come back from a training and then we want to implement it. But then if the reality is not there, or if nobody understands what we're doing, or nobody wants to play the game, dance the dance with us, that's quite
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's what gets me really excited. And I think it's the facilitator hat that I brought to it, which is like relationships and networks and systems are so powerful, and we can build those in a session. We don't have to do it after the fact. And like, if we have people together, we can build those, and those patterns will stay with that group beyond the container.
And it reminds me of the impact we've had. So my favorite client projects are those where we host or we deliver workshops for anyone in the organization, but they actually bring, so it's about either facilitation skills or psychological safety, unconscious bias, so all kind of related to facilitation, but they're very clear skills that we are teaching. But by having different participants from different teams and departments joining, and they're learning the same language and being in the breakout rooms together, they are building something together that they will then bring back to the teams. And then they will, once they all got the general knowledge, they will then bring the entire team in to dig deeper.
Oh, cool.
And the impact this had by just building bridges across the organization, that they start a conversation independent of the hierarchy or the different department, is incredibly strong.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's beyond even the team. That's that cross business unit, which is so difficult to create, right?
Yeah.
It's so powerful, I think. Okay, we're bringing back the AI.
Yes.
So why I mentioned those three lenses is because we've thought about it. Those three lenses is like, what is the impact at the personal level, the interpersonal level, and the environmental? And so, as like the L&D team, we've done something at the organizational level to encourage everyone to be experimenting with AI and create ways of doing that. And then at the personal level, that's where we're like facilitating and we're looking at how do we use it. Honestly, I haven't found a way yet to do it in a way that is a meaningful improvement on what I could do alone. I like you said, Chat GPT. I like that to enhance my writing sometimes, to test some of my thinking. I think it will be used in a variety of ways, and it's going to be great for individuals and teams and products. Still super early days. I don't think we know what we don't know yet.
True.
What have you found? What's your sentiment on it?
The different levels that I enjoy playing with it and working with it, what I realized is I learn a lot about human communication and interaction actually from the interaction. So recently I asked a prompt, like, write a case study on this topic, and with some parameters. And it was quite interesting what I got. Very creative, detailed, and it has a beautiful structure of a case study, of what I understand by a case study.
Wow.
And then I thought, oh, maybe I can even get. So I got then maybe greedy. So like, oh, maybe I can just feed it more information about what exactly I want in the case study, and then it will be even clearer. So I gave it more content and explained exactly the cornerstones. And then suddenly the case study basically turned into a very bad summary of the information that I fed it.
Oh, wow.
And it made me realize that, similar with working with humans, sometimes, so we do need a few restrictions. We do need to know what the what we expect the outcome to be. But as soon as we give too much input, we actually restrict the creativity, and we might get something that is just a worse version of what we could have done ourselves.
That is so interesting. That's that over-attachment piece, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah, you limit all those options because you were so attached to these things and you never let all these other things
Yeah.
emerge. Ah, that's really interesting. I like that. It reminded me of one other thing I think that I've come to believe. I think we're gonna find all sorts of ways of automating different things that are part of our lives, right? Automating or inserting intelligence forms in them. But the one thing that I'm most skeptical comes back to that process is the outcome thing, which is if we can find ways to automate decision making for groups, let's say, or automate co-creative processes for groups, I don't think the outcomes will be the same because the group hasn't been involved in the process. That thing of if you're not in the process, but you get the outcome, we haven't created understanding, we haven't renegotiated meaning, we haven't done, oh, that's my power. Sorry. I'll swap over. Welcome to South Africa.
I can still hear you.
There we
Ah,
go. It's just a screen swap that I do when I lose power. But yeah, that was coming to mind for me there was around when the process is the outcome is when I personally feel like we've gotten the most value. And so if we just get outcomes of our process, there's probably a place that's okay.
yes, and we do need the challenge in order to appreciate the outcome. And it reminds me of the change curve, that there is, or the team norming storming phase, that every
Yeah,
team has to go through that
yeah,
in order to grow the team. And I love the example you give with the decision making, because in order to really embrace a decision and then to do something with it, we do have to go through the different phases.
yeah, yeah. The process is part of the outcome,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
the wrestling, the challenging, the questioning, um, like same as the team forming that you mentioned. It transforms us. The process
Mhm.
transforms us as we go through it.
And some things just take time for our brain to process. So, for instance, Blinkist is a software that summarizes books, and
Mm-hmm.
you can listen to it or you can read it, and it's 15 minutes. And all these pop science self help books are on Blinkist. And I love the idea. And I have these phases where I would just binge listen because yes, I want to know it all. But then what do I remember? Nothing at all. The
Yeah.
only time where it's really valuable for me is when I already read the book and then I listen to the Blinkist as a kind of reminder or as a double check. Okay, what did they find interesting and does it match?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Oh,
just reading the summary or listening to it?
yeah. Oh, you sparked two thoughts for me. I think it's such a good point that you're touching on, which is um it reminded me of this book I'm reading called The Raw Edge of Sorrow.
Mm.
And it's a very, very deep book. And he trained with some, I think they were Jungian psychologists or was it one of them? And he's a psychologist, and he has in his office a big rock. And the one thing he says when people walk in is he touches the rock and he says, I work at the time frame of the earth. And he touches this rock and he's like, and then he speaks about how change is slow and we're going to move slowly and it's fine because like as a species we've started moving so fast, but the earth moves slowly and true change takes so much time and we so seldom give ourselves that time. So I love that analogy of like holding the rock and being like like we move at this speed and it's okay. Obviously organizations would have heart attacks if we said like we're facilitators, we're going to bring in, but it's just important to notice, I think rushing doesn't give us what we wanted to anyway. Like you said, you read those books quickly and cool, we think we're getting something, but we actually didn't get anything. So we might as well not have read them.
Yeah.
Which was the second thing that it connected to, was back to your new lead question of like, how do we know what's enough? And how do we know if they've gotten enough? And um, we can also only move as fast as we can move. We can also learn as fast as we can learn. And so we could give people 100 blinkers books of all the things they need to know, and they're not going to integrate them anyway. So rather like surrendering all of that and moving at the pace that they're going to move with them while bringing in a little bit of new information here and there, I think is more honest and also more impactful.
Yeah. And so counterintuitive, I think, for many.
Yeah.
That was a question I asked ChatGPT in my interview for the podcast, about the moving slow to move fast, going.
Mm.
What's the phrase?
You go slow to go fast.
Yes,
Something like
something.
that.
Yeah. And it provided with so many arguments why this is so true and why
Oh, really?
organizations have to embrace that principle, that in order to go
Oh,
fast, they have to slow down. And
wow.
yeah, the image that comes to my mind is when I'm so much in a hurry and then all my movements get fast and then the keys fall down, I have to pick up the keys again, and then I spill over and I cannot find stuff because my focus is somewhere else. Although
Mm-hmm.
when I take all my time, I'm actually faster because
100%.
everything I do is with precision.
Yeah.
And I started, I think, half a year ago, I realized that whenever I have this feeling of overwhelm and stress, I go for a walk.
Mm.
I go for a walk or even for a run. And when I come back, I realize, oh, it's actually not that much that I have to do.
Yeah, which is probably the opposite of what your brain wanted to do. It just probably
Exactly.
wants to sit there and wrestle and get more in a knot.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
then to create time, suddenly you also see more precisely on what to spend time on. Because I think most of the time we're actually wasting time on stuff that is not really necessary because our brain cannot see clearly.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's like some very important pieces there. Like the one you mentioned is slowing down a little bit, and the other that you said is becoming aware, like finding a language or uh, gaining that perspective. And it's something that a lot of our programs at Automatic, we focus on when people are in transitions, because that's often when you're most stressed, like you're coming a new lead or you're transitioning in a different space. And that is where we get caught into that trap you mentioned of like overwhelm, and then we speed up, and then we cause more chaos around us with the people because we're now doing all these weird things. And so I think what a lot of our programs try to do is acknowledging that it's not about providing more content to speed up the tornado. It's actually about creating those process spaces where people can come and slow down and make sense of their experience and find a language for it, as you said you did.
Mm.
Like you found a language, you made space, and that gave you way more options than three blinkers books would have.
And would this be a training part or a coaching part in your language?
That would be a coaching or a workshop container where there's like no more than 50% content. There's at least 50% process. And then we always have the content and we bring it in when it's relevant.
Mm. Love that. Where basically then they can also, because I think that's another problem of many L&D or trainings, that every every person, especially in a leadership position, is different. And
Yeah,
some styles and content might apply and others don't.
exactly.
But if
Some
you get
people
the
want to
theory,
use,
yeah.
exactly. Some people want to use a task board. Others want to use long lists. Some want to use bullet journaling. Like there is no right way to manage tasks. There is no, if there was, the world would have found it. We haven't found it yet. There's total diversity. And that's back to why I love dancing with Automatic, because they're like, manage projects however you want to manage them, deliver, but create your own ways. And so all these leads are finding their own ways of, as you said, that beautiful diversity is finding expression.
Wonderful. And within all this facilitation work, what remains your number one challenge?
So many. I think we've touched on quite a few, but the one that we haven't touched on yet is I'm struggling sometimes with that preparation phase and knowing how to move between advising versus honoring what someone is asking for. And this is specifically where, so a lot of what you and I have spoken about now is these ongoing programs we run, but there's another stream of work we have, which is just requests. So anyone in the organization can request facilitation or coaching, and then we move into their team and we facilitate a value session, a vision session, whatever it is. And so we often get these requests for X, and then through the preparation phase, I inquire a bit about what is it that you're really looking for? What is the outcome you're seeking? What's your team's context like? And I sometimes find myself in tension of like, well, you're asking for this, and I trust you to be resourceful and you know what you need. And yet I'm an expert in facilitation and group stuff. And so how do I honor what you need and trust it, but also advise and maybe suggest that maybe this isn't actually going to work for you, or maybe you shouldn't be doing that. But then that's kind of dishonoring or distrusting of your voice. So that tension I'm struggling with once in a while.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether it's from what you have shared until now, I see all this expertise and deep knowledge that you have. And what if they would actually be happy to have you challenge their perspective? And I think if you come in and stay, and I think that's where facilitators, it's a slippery slope, but especially if internal facilitators can play with their hats and say, okay, let me now speak not as the facilitator for whom you hired me, but let me speak as the person who has seen so many different teams already and who has been in this work for so long. And here's my advice from this position.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly that. What you said now, I sometimes feel uncomfortable doing because it's not what a facilitator does. It's what an internal employee might do consulting to them. And there have been times where I've done it at Automattic where I was asked to facilitate a retrospective, for example, and through preparation, I realized it was about one person's performance. They had really underperformed. And I was like, a retrospective is just going to put the group at risk. Like, we should not be using this process. And I eventually said no, and various things happened as a result afterwards, and it went well. But sometimes it's not that clear cut. Like, there are some divisions at Automattic that are under a lot of stress at the moment. They're high pressure. And so if they ask me to facilitate a very collaborative, open retrospective, I sometimes wonder, like, do you have the time? Is this how you should be spending your time right now? Things are on fire. So yeah, I'm working on that way that you phrased it, that offering advice while switching hats.
Yeah.
Comfortable.
And yeah, again, I think Lani Bear, who is the facilitator in the doll company, we spoke about the challenge of receiving too many requests. And then the distinction between, do they need my support or do they want me to do more work, their work?
Yeah, to
and
wrangle logistics.
And having clear questions. And have you already done this?
Yeah. We've tried something maybe slightly different as well, which is I'm building a network of facilitators at Automattic. So people who have either prior experience or have gone through some facilitation learning with me, and then we pair for a while, and then that network slowly growing. So that scaled my capacity a lot because I'm not the only one facilitating at Automattic now. There is this little network of power facilitators.
Beautiful.
Yeah. But I could do with some of those if this then that questions that you mentioned.
Yeah. And I can see it because especially when team leaders, they know about the beautiful work you do, and then they maybe want to give back to their team. And I think, a workshop is appreciating them. And then we spend some creative time together. But then if they're actually in stressful times, And then it can almost seem disrespectful of their times. Why would you want me to spend an entire day on something creative if then I have to work over the weekend to actually finish my to-do list?
Exactly. Exactly. And you sometimes can't surface that information through preparation. Sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't. And you only realize in the session, and then you're like, oh, this isn't meeting you where you are.
Yeah.
Mm.
We are always learning.
Yes, exactly. And that's not a failure, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I was excited to talk to you, and I could still talk to you for ages. It's
Yes.
so nice dancing around these topics with you.
Yeah. Really appreciate your perspective and the different lenses.
Thank you.
Looking forward to our next conversation.
Yes, yes. And seeing where your work goes, and yeah, I do follow you, so always looking at the cool things you're doing.
Thank you.
Cool.
Dun, 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 dun. End of the podcast jingle.